The city was a symphony of impatience, a relentless composition of blaring horns, screeching tires, and the percussive stomp of a million hurried feet on concrete. Rowan lived and breathed this rhythm, her own life, a frantic tempo set by deadlines and demands. As a senior archivist for the city's Historical Preservation Office, her days were a blur of brittle paper, faded ink, and the Sisyphean task of convincing developers that history was worth more than the square footage it occupied. She was good at her job, respected for her meticulous research and unyielding defense of forgotten landmarks, but the work was isolating. Her colleagues saw her as formidable, a dragon guarding her hoard of dusty scrolls. They didn't see the woman who went home to a quiet apartment, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator, who ate dinner standing over the sink because setting a table for one felt like a concession to loneliness. Her one true refuge, her sanctuary from the city's cacophony, was a small coffee shop tucked into a sliver of a building between a brutalist bank and a glass and steel condo tower. It was called the Gilded Leaf. The moment she pushed open the heavy oak door, the city's noise would fade, replaced by the gentle hiss of the espresso machine, the soft clink of ceramic on wood, and the low murmur of contented patrons. The air smelled of dark roast coffee, cinnamon, and something else, something green and loamy, like a forest after rain. Lush ferns cascaded from hanging baskets, ivy snaked around exposed brick walls, and a miniature fig tree stood proudly in the corner, its leaves glossy and vibrant. It was an oasis of calm, a pocket of impossible life in the urban desert. And at the heart of it all was Alaric. He wasn't the typical city baristano frantic energy, no performative but bored chatter. Alaric moved with a quiet, unhurried grace. He was tall and lean, with hair the color of dark, wet earth, and eyes that were a startling shade of moss green. They were old eyes, Rowan often thought, eyes that held a disconcerting depth, as if they'd seen the slow turning of seasons far longer than his apparent 30-some years would allow. He was a master of his craft. The coffee was sublime, but it was his latte art that was truly captivating. He never made the standard hearts or rosettas. For Rowan, it was always something different, something intricate and strangely personal. One day it might be a perfect, unfurling fern frond. The next, a detailed rendering of a spiral nautilus shell. Another time, it was a pattern that looked remarkably like the Celtic knotwork she'd been studying in a medieval manuscript that morning. She'd dismissed it as a coincidence, but the feeling of being seen lingered. Their interactions were brief, islands of tranquility in her turbulent day. "The usual Rowan?" he'd ask, his voice a low, soothing baritone that seemed to vibrate in her very bones. "Please, Alaric," she'd reply, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time all day. "You know me too well." He'd nod, a faint, knowing smile playing on his own lips as he worked. He never asked about her day, not in the glib, superficial way of most service workers. Instead, he seemed to intuit her mood. On stressful days, he'd add an extra dash of cinnamon to her oat milk latte. On days she came in looking weary, her coffee would be a bit stronger. One rainy Tuesday, she was particularly beleaguered. A developer was trying to tear down a historic 1920s theater, claiming its facade was structurally unsound, a lie she'd spent all morning disproving with engineering reports from 1928. She felt like she was single-handedly holding back a tide of relentless greed. She slumped onto a stool at the counter, her shoulders aching. Alaric placed her latte before her. Swirled into the foam was a perfect, delicate dandelion seed head, the tiny parachutes looking as if they were ready to drift away on the steam. "For resilience," he said softly, his green eyes meeting hers. "They thrive anywhere." The simple observation struck her with unexpected force. "Thank you," she managed, her throat tight. "I needed that." He simply nodded and went back to polishing the espresso machine, leaving her with the warmth of the mug, and the strange, comforting feeling that he understood more than he let on. She started noticing other oddities. The plants in the Gilded Leaf grew with an almost aggressive vitality, far beyond what indoor lighting and regular watering should produce. He never seemed to get sick. While other staff members would occasionally call out with the flu, Alaric was a constant, steady presence. And sometimes, when the light hit his eyes just right, she could have sworn she saw flecks of gold, like ancient amber, shimmering in their green depths. One afternoon, he handed her a small terracotta pot along with her coffee. In it was a single, strange-looking fern, its fronds a deep velvety green with an almost silvery sheen. "It looked like it belonged with you," he said, by way of explanation. "I kill everything," Rowan confessed. "My apartment is where green things go to die." A soft chuckle escaped him. "I don't think you'll kill this one. Just talk to it now and then. It will listen." She took the plant home, skeptical but touched. She placed it on her windowsill and, feeling foolish, whispered a hello to it. To her astonishment, the fern thrived. It didn't just survive. It flourished in her notoriously non-green thumb apartment, its fronds unfurling with a slow, deliberate grace. It was her silent companion in the evenings, a living link to the quiet man at the Gilded Leaf, a man she was beginning to realize she was more than a little intrigued by. She knew nothing about him outside the shop if he had a family, where he lived, what he did when he wasn't creating small masterpieces in foam. He was a pleasant mystery, a barista who made perfect coffee and seemed to understand the secret language of plants and weary souls. And for now, that was enough. She had no idea that the roots of his secrets ran deeper than any city foundation, and that they were about to tangle with her own life in the most profound and impossible way. The project landed on Rowan's desk with a thud that seemed to shake her very soul. It was a proposal from Omnicorp, a monolithic development firm known for its aggressive tactics and its soulless, glass-box architecture. Their target, a full city block on the industrial fringe downtown, designated Block 73A. The plan was to demolish the entire block, a hodgepodge of derelict warehouses, a crumbling brick tenement, and a few boarded-up storefronts to erect the Omnicorp Spire, a 60-story monument to corporate ego. Rowan's job was to conduct a final historical assessment, a formality before the demolition permits were rubber-stamped. No one expected her to find anything. The area was considered an urban blight. She spent days poring over deeds, maps, and city records. The history was unremarkable. The warehouses were built in the early 20th century, the tenement a few decades before that. Standard, utilitarian structures with no architectural significance. Yet, something felt off. The block formed a perfect, solid square, but the records for the central part of it were strangely blank. Old city plans showed the buildings ringing a central courtyard, but there were no photos, no deeds, no records of what that courtyard was ever used for. It was a void in the city's memory. Driven by a familiar professional stubbornness, she decided to visit the site. Block 73A was even more depressing in person. Chain-link fences topped with barbed wire sealed it off. The buildings were shells, their windows dark, dead eyes staring out onto a street littered with debris. Graffiti covered every surface, a chaotic tapestry of tags and faded murals. The air was heavy with the smell of damp decay and exhaust fumes. She found a gap in the fence and slipped through, her sensible shoes crunching on broken glass. The silence inside the perimeter was eerie. The roar of the city was muffled by the thick brick walls, creating a strange, deadened quiet. She walked into the space between the warehouses, the area that should have been the central courtyard. It was a wasteland of cracked concrete, choked with weeds and strewn with the detritus of decades of neglect. But as she stood in the center, a peculiar sensation washed over her. The air felt different, hair thicker, cleaner. A faint, almost imperceptible hum vibrated up through the soles of her shoes. She closed her eyes, trying to place it. It felt alive. a stark contrast to the decay surrounding her. She dismissed it as a trick of the mind, the acoustics of the enclosed space. That evening she found herself at the Gilded Leaf later than usual. The shop was empty except for Alaric, who was wiping down the marble countertop. The scent of coffee and damp earth welcomed her like an embrace. "Long day?" he asked, his voice pulling her from her thoughts. He was already turning to the espresso machine. "The longest," she sighed, sinking onto her favorite stool. "I'm fighting a losing battle, I think." She explained the Omnicorp project, the pressure from her superiors to sign off on it quickly, the frustrating blank spot in the historical record. "Block 73, she said, rubbing her temples. "It feels wrong, but I can't find a single logical reason to stop them." She looked up and saw that Alaric had gone completely still. The rag in his hand was motionless. His face, usually a mask of serene calm, was etched with an expression of profound and undisguised alarm. The color had drained from his cheeks, and his moss-green eyes were wide, the flecks of gold within them burning with a sudden, intense light. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice low and tight, stripped of its usual warmth. "Block 73, she repeated, confused by his reaction. "Off of Fenrir Street. Why? Do you know something about it?" He stared at her for a long moment, his gaze so intense it felt like he was looking straight through her, weighing, measuring, deciding. The air in the cozy shop suddenly felt charged, electric with unspoken tension. The gentle hiss of the espresso machine seemed to have fallen silent. "Rowan," he said, and her name on his lips now sounded like a prayer or a warning. "What I am about to tell you will sound impossible. You will want to dismiss it, to rationalize it away. I need you to try to keep an open mind." Her heart began to beat a little faster. This was it. This was the moment the pleasant mystery of the man unraveled. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He rounded the counter, his movements still retaining their innate grace, but now they were laced with an urgent energy. "The Gilded Leaf is more than a coffee shop. It's an anchor, a threshold. And Block 73A, it's not empty." He extended a hand to her. His palm was calloused, but his touch was surprisingly warm, sending a jolt through her system. "Let me show you." She hesitated for only a second. The rational, evidence-based archivist in her screamed that this was insane. But the woman who had watched a strange fern thrive on whispered words, who had seen ancient stories in latte foam, and who was inexplicably drawn to this quiet, mysterious man, took his hand. "Show me," she said. He led her out of the shop, locking the door behind them. He didn't hail a cab or head for the subway. Instead, he led her down a series of darkening alleyways she never knew existed, navigating the city's hidden arteries with an unerring confidence. The sounds of the metropolis faded further, replaced by the echo of their footsteps. They arrived back at the chain-link fence of Block 73A. The moon cast long, distorted shadows across the derelict buildings. Alaric didn't slip through the gap she had used earlier. He led her to a solid-looking brick wall on the side of the oldest warehouse, a wall covered in moss and faded graffiti. He ran his hand over the bricks, his fingers tracing a pattern she couldn't discern in the gloom. "In the old tongue?" he murmured, his voice resonating against the brick. "The words for stone and skin are nearly the same. Both are merely a boundary between what is within and what is without." He pressed his palm flat against the wall. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low grinding sound broke the silence. The bricks shifted, rearranging themselves, folding inward to reveal not a dark, dusty interior, but a passageway that glowed with a soft phosphorescent light. Rowan gasped, stumbling back a step. It was impossible. It defied every law of physics and engineering she had ever studied. "It's all right," Alaric said, his hand still holding hers, a warm, solid anchor in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. "The world is much older and stranger than your records show." He led her into the glowing passage. The air grew warmer, fragrant with the scent of damp soil, night-blooming flowers, and something ancient and wild. The light came from glowing fungi that clung to the tunnel walls, casting an ethereal blue-green luminescence. After about 20 feet, the tunnel opened up, and Rowan stepped out of it, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a cry of pure, unadulterated wonder. They were standing in the center of the block, in the courtyard that had been a concrete wasteland just hours before, but it wasn't a wasteland now. It was a forest. Not a park, not a garden, but a true primordial grove. Towering trees, the likes of which she'd never seen, formed a dense canopy high above, their leaves filtering the moonlight into shifting patterns on the forest floor. A carpet of moss, springy and vibrant underfoot, covered everything. A small, clear stream gurgled over smooth stones, its water shimmering with the same faint light as the tunnel fungi. Strange, beautiful flowers, luminous in the twilight, bloomed in clusters. The air was alive, humming with the thrum of a million tiny lives. It was the smell from the coffee shop, magnified 1,000 times the scent of life itself. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It is a haven," Alaric said, his gaze sweeping across the grove with a look of fierce love and protectiveness. "A pocket of the old world, the world as it was before the iron and the concrete. It has existed here for centuries, shielded, hidden, dreaming." He turned to her, his face illuminated by the magical light, and the last vestiges of the simple barista fell away. In his eyes, she saw the depth of ages, the wisdom of ancient trees, the patience of stone. "My name is Alaric," he said, his voice imbued with a new, quiet authority, "and I am its guardian. This is the secret I keep. And Omnicorp is not just planning to build a skyscraper. They are planning to murder a world." Rowan stared at him, then at the impossible, sacred forest hidden in the heart of the city's decay. Her life, her job, her understanding of reality, it had all been irrevocably fractured. The blank space on her maps was not an absence. It was a presence so profound it had to be hidden. The quiet barista she had a crush on was not just a man. He was something more, something ancient and tied to the very earth. And her job was no longer about saving brick and mortar. It was about saving magic itself. The wonder of the haven was a dizzying, intoxicating thing, but as the initial shock subsided, the cold dread of reality began to creep in. Rowan walked beside Alaric along the whispering stream, her sensible work shoes sinking slightly into the plush moss. She reached out to touch the bark of a silver-barked tree, and it felt warm, almost like living skin, a faint pulse beating beneath the surface. "How?" she asked, the single word encompassing 1,000 questions. "How is this possible?" "Magic is just a word for a science we've forgotten," Alaric explained, his voice softer here, in his element. "This grove is situated on a confluence of ley lines veins of telluric energy that crisscross the earth. The first guardians, my ancestors, learned how to weave these energies, to create a fold in the fabric of the world. They shielded it, nourished it, hid it from those who would exploit it." "Your ancestors?" Rowan repeated, trying to process the timeline. "How long have you been?" "My line is long," he said, a touch of sorrow in his tone. "But I am the last of them. The world grew loud, and my people faded. They forgot the songs of the earth. I remain." He stopped and faced her, the phosphorescent light catching the earnestness in his expression. "The Gilded Leaf is my connection to your world. It allows me to observe, to stay grounded. The shop itself is anchored to the haven. The coffee beans are grown here," he said, gesturing to a cluster of low, glossy-leafed bushes she hadn't noticed before. "The water is from this stream. The life you feel in the shop is the life of this place, bleeding through the threshold." It all clicked into place. The impossible vitality of the plants, the unique, restorative quality of the coffee, the way the shop felt like a sanctuary. It was a sanctuary, a tiny embassy of a lost world. "And Omnicorp?" she asked, her voice hardening. "They can't see this. To them, it's just concrete." "The shield is strong," Alaric confirmed. "It fools the eye, the camera, even satellite imaging. It shows the world what it expects to see. Urban decay. But it cannot fool the bulldozer. If they break ground, they will tear through the outer wards. The shock would be catastrophic. The haven would unravel. And since my life force is bound to it," he didn't need to finish the sentence. The weight of it settled on her. This wasn't just an ecological or historical disaster. It was extinction. The end of a man she was growing to care for, and the end of this breathtakingly beautiful secret world. "We have to stop them," she said, the archivist in her flaring to life, now fueled by a purpose far greater than preserving architecture. "My job. I can use my job." They returned to the city through the brick passage, emerging into the cold, gritty reality of the alley. The transition was jarring, like waking from a magnificent dream. Back in her quiet apartment, with the little silver-fronded fern standing sentinel on her windowsill, Rowan felt a chasm open between her two realities. The next morning, she went to work a changed woman. The sterile office, the hum of fluorescent lights, the cynical chatter of her colleagues, it all felt alien. She was moving through a shadow play, aware of the vibrant, living world that pulsed just beneath the surface of her own. Her first move was to file a preliminary injunction request, citing anomalous environmental readings and unverified historical soil strata at Block 73A. It was thin, a flimsy legal shield, but it would buy them time. Her boss, Mr. Davies, a man whose spine was made of jelly and ambition, called her into his office. "Rowan, what is this?" he demanded, waving the printout of her request. "Anomalous readings? Omnicorp's lawyers will have this thrown out by lunch. They have a dozen geologists on retainer. We look like fools." "There's something there, Robert," she insisted, trying to keep her voice steady. "The records are incomplete. We have a duty to investigate fully before a site of potential significance is destroyed." "Potential significance? It's a rat-infested dump," he scoffed. "Omnicorp is a major city partner. Don't go making waves. Finalize your report and sign off. That's an order." She walked out of his office, her jaw tight with fury. She was on her own, professionally. The system she had dedicated her life to was now the obstacle. That night, she met Alaric at the closed coffee shop. It now felt different, knowing the secret it held. She saw the ivy on the walls, not as decoration, but as a living emissary from the haven. "My boss ordered me to stand down," she told him, slumping onto a stool. "The legal route is going to be harder than I thought. They'll bury us in paperwork and dismiss our claims." Alaric was grinding some of the haven-grown coffee beans by hand, the rhythmic sound filling the quiet shop. "The mundane world has its own kind of magic," he said. "Bureaucracy, litigation, they are spells of a sort, designed to obfuscate and delay, but they can be countered." "How?" she asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "I need proof, something tangible that Omnicorp's lawyers can't dismiss." "The haven can provide," he said. He disappeared into the back room and returned with a long, shallow wooden box. He opened it on the counter. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried moss, were several objects, a series of core samples, cylindrical plugs of earth. In the cross-sections, layers of city soot and industrial fill gave way to impossibly rich, dark loam, and embedded within it were pollen grains of plants that had been extinct for thousands of years. There was also a small, leather-bound journal, its pages filled with elegant, spidery script, and a handful of hand-forged iron nails, rusted but of a design she'd never seen before. "The soil samples will confound their geologists," Alaric said, pointing to the cores. "This journal belonged to the first guardian. It details the founding of a settlement on this land, long before the city was chartered. And these nails, they are from that settlement. They predate any known structure on that block by at least a century. Rowan stared at the items, her archivist's mind racing. This was it. This was the ammunition she needed. It was real, physical evidence. She could use the journal to argue for an undiscovered colonial-era settlement demanding a full archaeological excavation. The nails were the proof. The pollen was the anomaly that would force them to stop and listen. "This is brilliant, Alaric," she breathed, carefully picking up one of the nails. It was cold and heavy, humming with a faint energy. "It's a perfect historical argument." "It is a story," he corrected gently. "A true one, but framed in a language your world will understand. The truth is, this land has been settled since long before any ships crossed the ocean." Over the next week, they worked tirelessly. By day, Rowan was a warrior in the archives, meticulously crafting her case. She discovered the journal in a forgotten corner of the municipal archivist, a fiction they both agreed was necessary. She submitted the nails for metallurgical analysis and the core samples to a university geology lab, knowing the results would be inexplicable and therefore demand further study. She leaked details of the finds to a history blogger she knew, starting a groundswell of public interest. By night, she was in the haven with Alaric. He showed her its secrets, the pool whose water could reveal fleeting glimpses of the past, the ancient trees that held the memories of centuries in their rings, the shy, luminous creatures that darted through the undergrowth. In the quiet sanctity of the grove, their connection deepened. The professional partnership born of crisis, slowly, inevitably, blossomed into something more. One evening, as they sat by the stream, the moonlight filtering through the canopy, he told her about the blight. "The haven is not just threatened by your world's machines," he said, his face grim. "There are other forces, things that feed on decay, on the absence of life. They are drawn to cities, where nature is starved and weak. They are called the Faders." "What are they?" Rowan asked, a shiver running down her spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "Spirits of entropy. They cannot create. They can only unmake. They weaken places like this from the inside, making them vulnerable. I have felt their touch recently. A coldness at the edges of the grove. The shield flickers sometimes. I believe they are whispering in the ears of men like those at Omnicorp, encouraging their desire to pave over the world, feeding on the destruction." The fight suddenly had a new, terrifying dimension. It wasn't just a soulless corporation. It was a corporation being influenced by a malevolent supernatural entity. They were fighting a war on two fronts, a legal battle in the world of humans and a spiritual battle in the world of magic. Rowan looked from the vibrant, living forest around her to Alaric's determined face. His eyes, full of ancient light, found hers. He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek, his fingers lingering for a moment. In that touch, there was a universe of shared secrets, shared purpose, and a burgeoning affection that felt as real and vital as the ground beneath them. "Then we fight on both fronts," she said, her voice firm. "You are not the last of your line, Alaric. Not anymore. You have me." His hand moved from her cheek to cup her jaw, and he leaned in. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened, tasting of coffee, rich earth, and a timeless, profound loneliness that was finally beginning to recede. In the heart of the hidden forest, surrounded by ancient magic and facing an overwhelming threat, Rowan knew she was no longer just an archivist. She was a guardian, too, and she was home. The backlash from Omnicorp was swift and brutal. Their legal team, a pack of sharp-suited sharks, descended upon the preservation office. They filed motions to dismiss Rowan's injunction, submitted affidavits from their own experts, claiming the artifacts were either fakes or misidentified, and launched a smear campaign in the press, painting Rowan as a rogue, obstructionist bureaucrat on a flight of fancy. Mr. Davies put her on administrative leave. "I'm sorry, Rowan," he'd said, avoiding her eyes. My hands are tied. The pressure is coming from the mayor's office. Just stay home until this blows over. Effectively fired, stripped of her access and authority, Rowan felt a surge of despair, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They had pushed her out of the system, but they didn't know the truth of what she was fighting for. They're trying to silence us in the courts and discredit us in public, she told Alaric that night, pacing the floor of the Gilded Leaf after hours. We're running out of time. The injunction won't hold for much longer. Alaric listened patiently, his presence a calming anchor in her storm of frustration. Then we must turn to a higher court, he said. The court of public opinion. Your world may worship money, but it also has a fondness for a good story, especially a story about the little guy fighting the big corporation. His words sparked an idea. Rowan remembered the history blogger she had leaked. The initial information told a passionate, independent journalist named Maya, who ran a popular local website called City Secrets. The next day, she met Maya in a neutral location, a park far from both her office and the Gilded Leaf. She laid out the entire narrative they had constructed, the story of the lost pre-colonial settlement, the David and Goliath struggle against Omnicorp, the city's attempt to sweep a potentially monumental historical find under the rug. She showed Maya copies of the journal pages, photos of the nails, and the baffling geological reports. She didn't mention magic, or ancient guardians, or hidden forests. She didn't have to. The truth, wrapped in a historically plausible narrative, was compelling enough. Maya's eyes lit up. This is huge, she said, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. This is exactly the kind of story that goes viral. Omnicorp to bulldoze city's secret birthplace. While Rowan ignited the public firestorm, Alaric focused on the internal one. The Blight's influence was growing stronger. In the Haven, a patch of trees near the eastern perimeter had begun to wither, their leaves turning a sickly, papery gray. The water in the stream ran a little more sluggishly, and the air had a faint, sour tang of decay. The Faders are concentrating their energy where the shield is weakest, he told her, his hand resting on the trunk of a dying silver-barked tree. Where the noise and disbelief of the city are strongest, they are trying to create a wound. What can we do? Rowan asked, her heart aching at the sight of the creeping corruption. The Haven responds to belief, to life. We must reinforce the wards from within, he said. He led her to the heart of the grove, to a circle of moss-covered standing stones she hadn't noticed before. They hummed with a palpable energy. This is the Heartwood, he explained, the central point of the confluence. The Guardians would renew the shields here by singing the songs of making. I don't know any songs of making, she said, feeling helpless. Yes, you do, he countered, taking her hands. You've been studying them your whole life. The stories of things, the history of a brick, the life of a building, the journey of an artifact. That is a kind of song. It's the story of what a thing is. Tell the Haven its story. Remind it of its history, its purpose. Your belief, your voice, can strengthen it. So they began a new ritual. Every night they would go to the Heartwood. Alaric would murmur words in the old tongue, his voice a low, resonant chant that made the air vibrate. And Rowan, feeling foolish at first, then empowered, would speak. She spoke of the city's history, of the layers of life and memory that made up the ground they stood on. She read passages from the Guardian's journal, giving voice to the Haven's own past. She described the artifacts, the nails, the pottery shards, connecting the physical objects to the spiritual reality. She poured her archivist's soul, her love for the stories of the past, into the ancient grove, and slowly, miraculously, it began to work. A faint green blush returned to the leaves of the withering trees. The air seemed to clear, the boundary between the encroaching blight and the vibrant life of the Haven held firm. Their nights in the grove were intense and intimate, forging a bond deeper than any ordinary romance. They were partners in a way she could never have imagined. Their skillshiz, ancient magic, her modern knowledge intertwined in a desperate dance to save a world. The lines between their lives blurred until they were one. Her lonely apartment felt empty without him. His solitary guardianship felt incomplete without her. Meanwhile, in the outside world, Maya's story exploded. The lost colony of Block 73A became the city's obsession. Protesters, organized by historical societies and student groups, began to gather daily outside the chain-link fences. The media picked up the story, and suddenly Omnicorp wasn't just a developer. It was a villain. The mayor's office was flooded with angry calls. Omnicorp, arrogant and enraged, decided to force the issue. They announced they had secured an emergency court order to override Rowan's injunction, citing project delays and contractual penalties. They would begin demolition in 48 hours. The news hit Rowan like a physical blow. "They're not even waiting," she said to Alaric, her voice trembling. "All of this, the protests, the story, it's not enough." "It has bought us time," Alaric said, his calm unwavering, though she could see the strain in his eyes. The fight was taking its toll on him. "But you're right. The final confrontation is at hand. They will bring their machines, and the Faders will use that breach to pour in." "So this is it," Rowan said, squaring her shoulders. "We have one last chance to stop them, on both fronts." Alaric looked at her, a world of gratitude and love in his moss-green eyes. "I used to think I was the last guardian, standing alone against the end. But the Haven chose you too, Rowan. It brought you to my door. It knew I could not do this alone." He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "Whatever happens, we face it together." The final 48 hours began to tick away, each second a countdown to either a miraculous victory or a devastating end. The city held its breath, watching the drama of the block of land it had ignored for a century. They thought they were watching a fight over history. They had no idea they were witnessing a battle for the soul of the world. The morning of the demolition dawned gray and oppressive. A low, bruised-looking sky hung over the city, threatening a rain that never came. The air was thick with tension. At Block 73A, the scene was a tableau of modern conflict. On one side stood the machines, two massive yellow bulldozers and an excavator with a wrecking ball, their engines rumbling with menacing potential. A line of grim-faced private security guards in black uniforms formed a barrier. On the other side, a passionate but ultimately powerless crowd of protesters chanted, waved signs, and pressed against police barricades. News vans with satellite dishes sprouting from their roofs lined the street, ready to broadcast the final act. Rowan and Alaric stood in the alleyway, near the hidden entrance to the Haven. They could feel the thrum of the machines through the soles of their shoes, a sickening vibration that echoed the growing weakness in the Grove's wards. "They've started to actively push against the shield," Alaric said, his face pale, a fine sheen of sweat on his brow. "The Faders. They're using the crowd's fear and the machine's aggression as a battering ram. I can feel the Haven straining." "I have one last idea," Rowan said, her mind racing. "It's a Hail Mary. Maya is broadcasting live. If I can get through the police line, if I can make a direct appeal, speak directly to the city." "It's too dangerous," Alaric countered, his hand tightening on her arm. "Omnicorp is playing for keeps." "And so are we," she shot back, her gaze determined. "You have to hold the line in there. I have to hold it out here. It's the only way." He saw the unshakable resolve in her eyes, the same fire she'd had when defending a 1,920s theater, now magnified for a cause infinitely greater. He nodded slowly. "Be careful." He leaned in and gave her a hard, desperate kiss. "I will keep it safe for you," he whispered against her lips. "There has to be something for me to come back to," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. Then they parted. Alaric slipped back through the brick gateway into the besieged Haven. Rowan took a deep breath, straightened her jacket, and walked out of the alley into the heart of the storm. Inside the grove, the change was terrifying. The light from the luminous flora was dimmer, flickering like dying embers. The air was cold, and the sickly sweet smell of decay was palpable. The blight was no longer just at the edges. It was seeping in, manifesting as ghostly gray tendrils of mist that snaked around tree trunks, draining their color and life. Alaric ran to the heartwood, the circle of standing stones. He placed his palms on the central stone, closing his eyes and pouring every ounce of his energy, his very life force, into reinforcing the wards. Noli, he chanted, his voice echoing in the struggling grove. Indome, etele, will, endurance, spring. The old tongue words were a desperate prayer, a thread of life pushed against an ocean of entropy. The stones beneath his hands pulsed with a weak, corresponding light. Outside, Rowan shoved her way through the throng of protesters, her eyes locked on Maya, who was giving a frantic report to her camera. The final standoff is moments away, Maya was saying. Omnicorp has the legal right, but the people of this city are making it clear they believe this is a moral wrong. Rowan grabbed her arm. Maya, put me on. Maya's eyes widened. Rowan! They'll arrest you! Just do it. Maya nodded, spinning her around to face the camera. I'm here with Rowan Archer, the historian at the center of this controversy. Rowan, you're on administrative leave. You've been ordered to stay away. Rowan ignored her, looking directly into the camera lens, projecting her voice over the noise. People of this city, she began, her voice shaking but clear. I know this looks like a fight about old buildings. It isn't. It's about what we value. It's about the parts of our world that don't have a price tag. There is something alive in this place, something that remembers a time before concrete. You can't see it, but I know you can feel it. It's the reason you're here. It's the nagging feeling that we are about to erase something irreplaceable. As she spoke, her words broadcast across the city on phones and laptops. A strange thing began to happen. In the haven, Alaric felt a new surge of energy. It wasn't his own. It was a chorus, 1,000 tiny threads of light flowing into the grove from the outside world. The belief of the people watching, sparked by Rowan's passionate plea, was piercing the veil. The gray mist of the faders recoiled. The light from the heartwood stones flared brighter. A corporate-looking man in a sharp suit, the Omnicorp site manager, spoke into a radio. We're clear. Start the engines. Move in. The roar of the first bulldozer's engine intensified as it lurched forward, its massive steel blade aimed at the wall of the nearest warehouse. No! Rowan screamed, her voice raw. She broke away from Maya and ran, ducking under the police tape, placing herself directly in the path of the machine. The driver slammed on the brakes, the bulldozer halting just feet from her. Security guards rushed forward to grab her. But in that moment, Alaric, bolstered by the influx of belief, unleashed the haven's power. He slammed his hands down on the heartwood stone. A wave of pure, untamed life energy erupted from the center of Block 73A. It wasn't violent, but it was undeniable. The ground shook. A soft, green-gold light pulsed outward, visible for a split second even in the gray daylight, washing over the entire block. Every weed sprouting from the cracked pavement suddenly grew a foot taller, bursting into vibrant, impossible flower. The ivy on the old brick walls snaked visibly, its leaves unfurling in a wave of emerald green. The air filled with the scent of rain-soaked earth and blooming jasmine. Everyone froze. The protesters, the police, the news crews, even the Omnicorp goons. The bulldozer's engine sputtered and died, as if choked by the sheer vitality. Rowan, standing before the silent machine, felt the wave of life wash over her like a benediction. She looked up at the warehouse wall the dozer had been about to hit. The ancient brick seemed to shimmer, and for a fleeting instant, she and everyone else watching could see through it, a momentary glimpse of the towering, luminous trees of the haven within. It was over in a second, but it was enough. The crowd gasped, a collective sound of pure astonishment. Maya's cameraman had caught it all. The Omnicorp manager stared, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. He knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that he was defeated. There was no spinning this. There was no explaining it away. In the stunned silence, Mr. Davies, Rowan's boss, pushed his way to the front. He had seen the broadcast, seen the impossible light. His face was pale, but his eyes held a newfound conviction. He walked up to Rowan, ignoring the Omnicorp security. "The mayor just called," he said, his voice trembling with awe. "The demolition permit is revoked, effective immediately. He's declaring the entire block a protected historical and ecological anomaly." A ragged, disbelieving cheer erupted from the crowd. It grew into a roar of triumph. Rowan's legs gave out, and she sank to her knees, tears of relief and exhaustion streaming down her face. It was over. They had won. Later, after the crowds had dispersed, and the silent machines were hauled away, Rowan slipped back through the hidden entrance. The haven was bathed in a soft, healing light. The blight was gone, banished by the combined force of the grove's magic and the city's belief. Alaric was sitting by the stream, looking exhausted but whole. He looked up as she approached, and a slow, beautiful smile spread across his face. She sat down beside him, laying her head on his shoulder. They didn't speak for a long time, simply listening to the gentle sounds of the rejuvenated forest, the gurgle of the water, the rustle of leaves, the thrum of life. "The Gilded Leaf is going to be very busy," she said finally, a smile in her voice. "I might have to hire more staff," he agreed, his arm tightening around her. The world outside had a new mystery to ponder, a new city secret that would be debated for years. They would call it a geological marvel, a trick of the light, a mass hallucination. They would never know the full truth, but that was all right. The haven was safe. Rowan looked around at the impossible, beautiful world hidden in the heart of the city she called home. Her life of dusty scrolls and lonely evenings was a lifetime away. She had thought she was saving history, but she had ended up becoming part of a story far older and more magical than any she could have found in an archive. She turned her face up to Alaric, the simple barista, who was the guardian of a world, and her partner in all things. "So," she said softly, "what does a co-guardian's job description look like?" He kissed her, a long, sweet kiss full of promise and shared dawns. "It looks a lot like this," he murmured, "for a very, very long time."